passage together. This is an intervention called choral reading. You can do it with just like a partner pair, like we're doing, a small group, or a whole classroom can read together. And yeah, I took this from the ACT website, so I'm gonna give it to Vincent after this.
Nice. Okay.
It's called The Men of Brewster Place, and we'll just read at a normal rhythm together until we get to the end of the sentence.
Okay.
All right. Clifford Jackson, or Abshu, as he preferred to be known in the streets, had committed himself several years ago to use his talents as a playwright to broaden the horizons for the young, gifted, and black, which was how he saw every child milling around that dark street. And so that is an example of choral reading, and the students will follow along either with their fingers, they'll have their own copy, or as we're doing, they can share with their teacher. And whenever they kind of stumble on a word, they can hear someone else say it as it's supposed to be said, so it can help them. And now the next one we're going to do is repeated reading. And so this is working on a student's tone and intonation.
Okay.
And I would explain to them that we are going to read like newscasters. Newscasters don't just memorize everything that they say, they read it, but it sounds like they've memorized it because they say it in a normal voice. And so since this is the first time we're reading this, you'll read the next sentence just by yourself. We can go to here. So you can read from here to here for me the first time, just how you normally read.
As head of the community center, he went after every existing grant on the city and state level to bring them puppet shows with the message to avoid drugs and stay in school.
Nice, and you got every word right. If a student did not get a phrase right, then we would go over that before we did it again. And then I would say, okay, it's my turn. Now I'm gonna read it like I'm a newscaster. And I would say, as head of the community center, he went after every existing grant on the city and state level to bring them puppet shows with the message to avoid drugs and stay in school. And working on that tone over and over, and then the student would read it again, and we would repeat that over and over until they were very excited and could do it with every tone,
nuance.
every nuance that they could.
Cool.
And so this is repeated reading because they get to read the same thing over and over again and get used to it, but they're adding their tone and inflection every time they read it. And you can do this as many times as they need.
Awesome.
Yeah. And the next one kind of goes along with this. It's called paired reading. And so you would pair up the students, and you can do it in different ways. But the way we'll do it is that we'll read back and forth to each other. And so you can read this sentence. That's a long sentence. And then I'll read this sentence, and we'll just go back and forth.
Okay. Abshu believed there was something in Shakespeare for everyone, even the young of Brewster Place. And if you broaden their horizons just a little bit, there might be enough room for some of them to slip through and see what the world had waiting.
All right, now when I go, if I mess up, you are allowed to correct me and follow along. No, it would not be a perfect world, but definitely one more room with more room than they had now. And then we go back and forth that same way with one student listening for errors, so they're still following along, and one practicing reading it aloud.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. And then this one is called phrase drill or word drill. So I would listen to a student read a passage, and any words or phrases that they got wrong, we would review them and go over them. So a couple of these words in this passage could be preached, could be an offhand remark, if they are unaware of that, or one-on-one out on the basketball court.
So you would define those phrases?
We would work on how to say them and how to read them, and then if they still didn't know what it was, we would probably explain it to them.
Okay.
And then we just go it's a drill. So every word that I saw they got wrong, we
Just
drill it over and
again
over.
and again
We could
and
make
again.
flashcards, we could reread the passage, and so we would just continue to read. But since we don't really have any reading issues, I don't think that we can mimic this intervention, but now you see what we would do if that was a thing.
Excellent.
And the last one is listening passage preview with keyword discussion, which also brings in those words that students may not know.
Like immaculate?
Yes, like immaculate. So we would be teaching this to the student, like you said in the last one. The keyword discussion and the preview of what's going to go on is going to help them when they do decide to read it. So a lot of times teachers define the key vocabulary words before they read a story so the students understand the story that's being read to them. And so first we would go over immaculate. If you did not know what that meant, I'd give you an example like it's pristine. And if you weren't at the high school level like this, I would say something like perfect or something more on the student's level. We could give an example. If they were younger or visual, we could draw a picture until they knew what that word meant, and then we would go into the passage and I would read first. So in this section it says, the Masons lived in a small wooden bungalow right on the edges of Linden Hills, and Mother Mason insisted that they tell anybody who asked that they actually lived in Linden Hills, a more prestigious address than Summit Place. It was a home that was kept immaculate. And then as they go through, they would be able to do that. And since the other portion of this intervention, not just the keywords, is listening passage preview, the first step is what you just did. The student listens to me read it as they follow along, and then they get to read it. So then you would read this and hopefully have better fluency because you've already heard this word multiple times.
The Masons lived in a small wooden bungalow right on the edge of Linden Hills, and Mother Mason insisted that they tell anybody who asked that they actually lived in Linden Hills, a more prestigious address than Summit Place. It was a home that was kept immaculate.
Right. And so they get to hear it more. They hopefully read along the first time, so they read it twice, and they get the keyword definitions beforehand. And so those are a few of the reading interventions that we learned in school this week. And that's it.
I like it. That's awesome.